Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev Podcast. So, how do you achieve a rewarding and successful career in organization development that leverages your strengths and the unique impact you want to create in the world? What kind of OD practitioner are you? Are you a Renaissance consultant, a creative amplifier, or maybe a humanity hawk? In this episode of the OrgDev Podcast, we're joined by the formidably productive and insightful Dr. William Brendel. He is a cutting-edge researcher in the field of OD careers and professional development. Dr. William, or Bill, is a multi-award-winning organization development educator, adjunct professor at Penn State University, author and consultant, and founder of OpenSourceOD. Today's episode is a like all-you-can-eat buffet where everything is good because there are so many things we want to talk to Bill about. What originally drew us to invite Bill with his work as the founder of OpenSourceOD, a resource and community dedicated to democratizing organization development knowledge for all. And Danny and I regularly cite his outstanding research when we talk at universities. Not only is Bill a great researcher, he has over 25 years of global OD experience as a principal consultant at the Transformative Learning Institute, and he's dedicated his career to elevating the strategic performance of organizations committed to human-centered innovation. And his consulting work has taken in organizations such as Bankers America, Panasonic, and the US Army. Finally, naturally, Bill's experience is underpinned with impeccable academic credentials, including a doctorate from Columbia, a master's in social and organizational psychology, and a degree in IO psychology as well. So Bill, thank you so much for joining us. We've been looking forward to this conversation all week long.
We're going to kick off. So I was going to say easy question, but you do so much. Tell us a bit about the work that you do. What does that involve?
Well, I think that it's not uncommon that folks who are, scholar practitioners, which is probably the category where I put myself, do a lot of research, but they always have their toe in consulting, keep things nice and fresh. But what's really consumed my time recently is a question that my students and even some of my clients just continue to ask, which is, what is OD? What is organization development? And if I get a degree or a certificate in this, what can I do? And I was giving them crappy answers. I kept saying, well, you could be a consultant, or you could become a better leader, maybe join an HR outfit. But honestly, those answers, I try to put myself in their shoes. It's just not good enough. And I mean, the dirty little secret, maybe it's not so much of a secret, is that most people don't know what OD is. Most people don't know OD exists, if we're being honest. And that's a shame, because if there's any discipline that can help us address the major problems of our world and all of these problems in the workplace, it's OD. So all of my work is now mainly concentrated on helping people bridge from academia into the field of OD, creating a pipeline that's clear and cuts through all the chatter and confusion that people have. And it's a big task, so I haven't figured that out yet, but I'm working toward it.
It's such important work. We're with you on the value that OD can bring to all of the challenges that we're seeing in society and workplaces. So is that the kind of origin of OpenSourceOD then, the work you've talked about there?
It is the mission. And for a long time, and I think it's a natural thing when new disciplines are born and they are forming. OD has had its birth around 1969. Okay, so in the grand scheme of things, that's not that long ago. So when groups form, the first thing they do is they get an identity and they're facing inward. They're working to figure out who they are, what they're all about, what their mission is. And so that's an inward focus, and it's really time to shift that outward. And so OpenSourceOD is about opening the doors now to OD and creating pockets where you still have the core of OD and you know what it is and you know the theories that have built it up. But now you're beginning to reach out into other disciplines. That's the beauty of OD. It's ubiquitous. You can apply it anywhere there's a person and a system. It's that simple. So now OpenSourceOD is dedicated to democratizing and even breaking down the walls of financial barriers to learning about OD, academic barriers, and so on. It's not just for people who can afford a graduate education. So that's where I'm going.
What's the focus of OpenSourceOD at the moment then? So I know, having looked, there's an assessment, isn't there, that you developed. The most, is it the most?
Yeah, MOST stands for Mastering Organizational and Societal Transformation. And that assessment was reverse engineered by looking at thousands of positions, actual job descriptions, and websites of OD consultants, because you have the internal and the external. And I analyzed them for 4 different features. What type of approach did these, different just descriptions take. And that's important. We found out that there's basically two dominant areas. One is an innovative approach and one is a classic approach, more of a step-by-step approach. Another difference is that there's a pure versus hybrid OD type of split. Pure is your purist. This is OD proper. We follow the OD way. And hybrid dips into other professions like strategic HR business partners and that sort of talent development and so on. And there are a couple of other distinguishing features that make OD what it is. I won't get too deep into those, but there are 4, and this assessment actually does 2 things. The first is, and I should mention this, it's the only psychometrically validated instrument of OD competencies. So you'll already get a sense of how strong am I in different areas, in different competencies. But it also, due to this reverse engineering, will tell you and provide you with examples of job descriptions and evidence about what type of career path you're most closely aligned with, not only through your strengths, but your interests. And everything else on OpenSourceOD is dedicated to taking you from that knowledge and that understanding and connecting you with the right networks, putting you in places where you can find jobs that match your competencies and interests, educating you about OD, and putting all the tools, 98 tools, at your fingertips. And that's really what it takes to bridge a big gap between graduating or getting a certificate and practicing OD or advancing your OD career. There are other things like there's a little magazine, OD Insights, that's going to be coming out that translates these research findings that typically collect dust on the shelves and how you actually put them into practice. So you see, we're bridging a lot of research to practice, and that's what it's all about.
It's such an incredible resource. It's almost like it's the kind of thing that we wish we'd had, because a lot of OD practitioners have to sort of find their way. And you touched on a really important one of your findings, is that you don't necessarily type into Monster or Indeed and type in organization development practitioner and the jobs come up. You've sort of found that a lot of them are hybrid roles. What have been some of your findings of the job landscape?
Oh, it's interesting. So I'm just going to be blunt and say that most of the job descriptions are not really well created. So there's a nice thing here where this study of OD through 3 lenses, we look at the academic, the traditional OD, we look at what employers are looking at, and we look through the lens of emerging practitioners, right? And then we go back to those descriptions, and we had to throw out hundreds of these job descriptions from our inclusion in the study because they were leaning toward OD, but they really didn't capture all of OD. So I think what's going to happen, hopefully, is that through a better description of OD, better job descriptions will be created instead of taking from a grab bag of other job descriptions and throwing them all together. And I think something else that OpenSourceOD can help with is creating job descriptions that align very neatly with the business or organizational objectives or strategic objectives for the next 3 years. And that's where I think this becomes exceptionally powerful. So let's say that an organization is going to be going through a redesign and they want the redesign to be human-centric. And you have your OD employees take this assessment and you find out that some of them have training in human-centered design, maybe the design thinking, but they lack certain competencies in org design, right? And so now we know where to either invest money in upskilling or hire somebody new to complement the team. And that's where those job descriptions come in. And so the bridge or the pipeline is between those job descriptions and the thousands of people who are taking this assessment and understanding how they fit. And this has already started. I don't want to talk too much about it unless you're interested, but we are rolling this out in organizations like the Ontario OD Healthcare Network and other places where this is just becoming advantageous to organizations, and also cost cutting in a really nice way and being more efficient with the talent you already have. So that's a big answer to your question, but we're thinking pipeline, better job descriptions, more strategic fit so you don't have to demonstrate your value to the organization. It's set from the beginning.
Yeah, and job descriptions are so often just, like you said, thrown together. Like there's so much care that's put into making the space for them, but the job description doesn't necessarily do the mechanics. Why is that? Is it because it's non-OD people often building the job description?
I love that question. I think it's the saying garbage in, garbage out. Now, I'm not saying that the people who are creating the descriptions are garbage, but a lot of times people who create these descriptions go online, they type in organization development, they find out what it is, they get a hodgepodge, or they're not even thinking about what OD is, and they're just throwing something together. And I can't blame them, because if you go to OStarNet or ONET, which is the US, in the US we have this thing called ONET, and it's like the official registry that deconstructs all jobs and their tasks, and OD is not one of those official careers. That is where a lot of people go to create their job description. So one of my goals, my little goals, is to get OD on ONET. And I think if we could do that and influence it through this validated instrument of all these different competencies, we have a leg to stand on as a profession. And until we do that, we've had a lot of competency models that have come out. They're wonderful. In fact, the one I developed is based on all of them, but none of them validated themselves in the way that really, really rigorously needed to be done. Now that we have that, it's time to take it to the next level so that those job descriptions, people have something. I mean, we can't blame them. If there's nothing to pull from, what do you do, right?
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing is I talk to a lot of OD practitioners who've taken roles in-house with the title of OD manager or head of OD, and then they get in and they're not doing organisation development at all.
It's
And there's this
Learning and development plus.
There's a huge frustration because they've gone in and they're like, I'm here to do OD, but I'm not being given the chance to do anything remotely like organisation development. So that's an education piece, isn't it, for the practitioners and the organisations they're going into?
It's really about strategic value. And honestly, I think that most OD programs have to do a lot more at helping people not just understand how to do OD, but to demonstrate and be at the executive drawing board in terms of how do we enhance the health of this organization, both through its processes and its people and its design, to push our strategy forward. So OD is like a secret weapon. If you get it right, and there are organizations who get it right, you end up hiring the best and retaining the best OD professionals. But you mentioned healthcare, and healthcare is a troublemaker. They hire, according to our analysis, they hire the most internal OD people. So if you want to go after an industry and this is a little pro tip, you want to look for a job, look at healthcare. They are hiring the most, but they're executing OD the least in terms of its actual value. And so it's like you said, Garen, it's training and development plus. So what's the bridge? The bridge is strategic value and demonstrating that value, which is why ROI, understanding return on investment, and making the business case are part of what OpenSourceOD is helping to do. Anyway, if that makes sense, we're trying to fill that gap.
You produced a stunning paper that we really enjoyed reading, and some of the things it talks about gets to the heart of the OD challenge, which is like, you talk about the fact that people don't register, they're not licensed, that there's 144 different graduate programs or advanced programs for people to sort of follow. It's the borders or the boundaries of OD are very porous. They're the kind of thing that makes our profession so rich and full of variety. We're called the magpie profession for a reason, aren't we? Because we do collect all of these wonderful different disciplines and fold them into our own. It is difficult. OD is always evolving, isn't it, in terms of what we do? How do you sort of say, right, this is what it is, take a photograph in time and then keep it evolving as it goes?
That is the $1 million question, Garen. I love that question. And it's something that has racked my brain. That is the question, because OD needs to evolve, just like other professions need to evolve, right? You throw AI into the mix and there will be other advancements that we have to evolve with. So how do you keep the core of OD, but also allow it to evolve? So the way I look at it is, what model is out there that we could copycat? And the model I pull from is the Linnaean model of evolution in biology, right? So there are certain characteristics that link all flowers together so that a child can easily differentiate a flower from a tree. Yet there are millions of different types of flowers all over the world. So how do we keep what those key characteristics are of OD, but allow for variety so that OD can handle numerous challenges? Because what OD is ultimately is managing and influencing change at the intersection of people and process, or people and strategy, or people and culture, those sorts of things. So there's a 3-part test to whether you know something is OD. This is the 3-part test, argument anyway, based on the founders of OD. OD isn't OD unless you are working on something technical, right? Like performance or design or strategy. And you're working on something social, right? Like humanity, DE&I, culture, psychology. And most importantly, you are influencing them. So there are different ways to influence the transformation of that relationship, like learning and innovation and consulting, right? So if you have a job or a job description that requires social competencies, which you don't have to know all of them, by the way, right? You could be an expert in ethics, for instance. That's a social piece. And then there's strategy, right? That's the technical piece. And then maybe there's the consulting and learning piece. You know what that would be great for? That would be a great OD application in large banks who are trying to hire and develop and create systems and structures for more ethical banking, right? This is a call across banking. So that's how you take the core of OD, that three-part OD thing, and you can actually tie it to a strategic value for an industry, for instance. Yet, the way that you approach these things, right? For instance, design, which is a technical piece. What IDEO did was they introduced this thing called design thinking and made it really popular. When OD was founded, that didn't exist. But now it's part of that evolutionary tree. It has become part of what OD practitioners might do. They might choose to do it. Human-centered design. And so those evolutions is sort of like coming out of this three-part model. You can track how OD evolves in multiple directions. And that's super exciting to me because it also creates a forefront that people can experiment with new OD applications by drawing from what has come before them. It's a very long answer, but
No, I can
I
feel
look at it.
Kurt Lewin in the background is nodding approvingly.
Yeah, right. You got Kurt Lewin and Bamford and Trist, the social technical systems theorists, and all the original people, right? Ed Schein, so yeah.
And I guess what you're doing as well is OD people are often addicted to learning and they live in the world of the conditional. Once I learn this, then I can.
Done.
And it feels like a never-ending journey, whereas what you're sort of saying is that, no, you can have a very flourishing niche in it and feel free to branch out, but you're good where you are. Like, master this area, that's a way in, and then build out from there. So that's actually quite liberating for a lot of OD practitioners, I imagine.
It is. And you know, a lot of the good work that the OD network, big shout out to the OD network that really held a lot of this together. They created a competency model, but the model is called full spectrum OD. Very similar to my model. My model has some other things going on. This full spectrum OD is intimidating to new practitioners because oftentimes they look at it and they feel like, I've got to learn this entire thing to be an OD consultant? Yeah, good luck. You have a snowball's chance in hell to do that, really. But what this does, it says, no, you can have strategic value in any number of places. So let's do this. Let's understand what your existing strengths are, right? And then let's look at what you're super interested in doing. And then the gap between those is, I call that the meaningful growth gap. You create a career plan for yourself, and then you know exactly which industries and types of jobs to look for and search terms and so on and so forth. The other thing that I think is important to answer your question or your comment is it's not just if I learn this, then I can do that. There's an old jazz standard in the United States that it says it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. That's what gets results. And so there's an additional piece to OpenSourceOD, which is really supported by what are called OD Immersives. And this is the wisdom piece. This is developing the reflective practice that all OD practitioners need, including things like use of self, understanding ethics, humble inquiry, intuitive consulting, seeing and understanding the influence of privilege. And so we have about, I think, 9 so far and growing OD Immersives, which are really fun because they bring people together. They put them in the driver's seat of a real OD case study contributed by a really well-known OD person like an Ed Schein or Francis Baldwin or Peter Block. And you have facilitators that guide them through not just what would you do, right? Would you do process mapping here? No, that's not what this does. What this does is it says you're going to encounter a lot of disorienting dilemmas as an OD consultant. Let's reflect on our interiority, our assumptions, our anxieties, our attachments, right? Let's understand how we want to react quickly in the moment, but let's kind of freeze time and reflect on where are our values and how do we act in best alignment with our values. And that is the wisdom of OD, and that's a continuous practice. So OpenSourceOD essentially introduces people to careers and skills that they can develop to be better practitioners, but also a place like a dojo where you can go and practice your craft. And there's no limit to how good you become. And you get to do it with others, which makes it kind of fun.
And I guess it's almost like a bit of a sandbox as well, isn't it? Because, when you're with the client or you're in your own organization, you can't help but feel that the stakes are higher, but this is a place to practice and sort of listen to those messages that you hear through your intuition or physiologically and all that as well.
Yeah, it really, and you know what? One of the hidden benefits I never thought of, but has really come out, is that people feel like it's their place to feel sane again, where they come and they go, I've been through that. I don't know what the hell to do in that situation. I want to strangle my client. You want to strangle your client. Why do you want to strangle your client? Because he's missing all these things, or she keeps doing things that she wants despite what the group wants, right? And when you're with other practitioners, what's beautiful is that in all of these immersives, it's not about the simulation, it's about the people in the room, because we get people from all over the world. And when they're in the same room experiencing the same dilemma, all these ideas come up, all of these coping strategies and great questions to ask. And it just sort of becomes this generative space where people say, okay, one, I'm not alone. Change is really hard, right? And two, there are some really great strategies to do this. So the neat thing about being an OD consultant is you're never really alone. You always have other OD consultants on your shoulder, kind of reminding you about your value system and the strategies and so on. And that's something you don't really get in higher ed. That's a big missing component, because the curriculum focuses more on a banking methodology where you have a PowerPoint and you open the person's head and you throw, this is step one, this is step two. But the doing of it, that's where you're most effective. And it's scary because a lot of people get thrown into our field and they get freaked out, either because they're in a career path that is antithetical to what their interests and strengths are, or it's just overwhelming. It can be really overwhelming as a new practitioner. So that's why I like this. And I have a lot of fun. This is sort of my guilty pleasure, is doing these immersives.
Brilliant. And what was your journey into OD? Like, how did you find it? How did you begin before you made this huge commitment to bringing up this brilliant resource?
Well, I was always a consultant, always. Since 1998, I'll age myself a little bit here. I was always consulting. And of course, to become a better consultant, you have to fill your noggin. You've got to learn things. You have to learn practices. And so I decided, knowing Warner Burke as a big name in the field of OD, and the fact that he was right up the one train to Columbia University, I decided, let me go there. Let me learn from a founder of this field. And it was incredible. Primary focus was social organizational psychology and change. But what I wasn't getting from the program was a deeper understanding of adult learning and leadership, which really are kind of the same thing, right? If you're helping people learn, which includes motivation and so on. So that's where I got my doctorate at Columbia, which was a degree in adult learning and leadership. So I like to tell people, if you took my doctorate and you took my undergrad and they had a baby, that would be a very powerful form of OD, right? Because you've got the rigor and you've got the ROI and you have the behavioral science background, but you also have what to do with it. How to lead, how to let people learn. I found that in most programs, this is my shout out to all those 144 programs, to think about where your imbalance is, right? You might be more balanced towards the learning piece and you're missing the ROI and strategic piece. Or it might be the opposite. So the question is, how do you balance those out? Same thing in organizations. What is your dominant and recessive sort of approach? And individuals, what's your dominant and recessive? How do you balance those?
And one of the things that comes out as well is ethics seems to be a big part of your work as well. You talked about the role that ethics plays in decision making. What is it about sort of that stood out for you as a subject that you really wanted to focus on?
Last night when I was teaching my appreciative inquiry course online, we were talking about the ethical dimensions of appreciative inquiry and the ethical pitfalls, and there are many. So one area I'm really interested in is this area that was produced by Albert Bandura, and it's on a subject called moral disengagement. And you may have heard about this without knowing what the proper title is. Moral engagement is a psychological mechanism that exists in all of us. And it basically is, what is it that makes us talk ourselves out of doing the right thing, rationalizing out of doing the right thing? And there are 8 different moral disengagement mechanisms, which means we are ripe for doing the wrong thing, right? So with if you think about a piece of paper on the floor and you see it, you could say, do I pick up that piece of paper and throw it out, or do I leave it there? And you can imagine there's all kinds of reasons to just leave it there, right? Somebody else will do it. That's called diffusion of responsibility, right? It's dirty, right? And that's another moral disengagement mechanism. So with well-intentioned approaches like appreciative inquiry or theory U or any of these really well-intentioned, highly practiced, highly researched ways of doing things, they can actually have unintentional negative ethical consequences. Here's an example. In appreciative inquiry, if you are focusing on growth areas, you're using the term growth areas, but the systemic problem is bullying in the workplace, growth areas becomes a euphemistic label, which actually disregards the significance, the severity of bullying. Even if appreciative inquiry is not meant intentionally to address bullying, it's not addressing the underlying thing that's a toxic piece in the culture, right? And the opposite is true. If you're coming in not with an appreciative lens, but a deficit lens, you're missing something else that is also part of the equation, part of the human experience. So there are a lot of pitfalls, ethical pitfalls. You know what they say about the road to hell, right? Paved with good intentions. So I think it's really important to practice two things to remedy this. One is mindfulness practice, which is a really big interest of mine. And the other, which is related, is reflective practice, which I talked about a little earlier. And the field of OD has a really great ethical defense mechanism called use of self. And use of self is essentially, how do I choose to be my best, most ethical self in every moment? It's a practice of checking your espoused values versus your values in use, as Chris Argyros would call it, constantly. And learning from experience and baking that into your next time out. So a really nice remedy to the ethical dilemmas that are scattered all throughout OD is use of self. So that's become another interest of mine.
It's really interesting though, isn't it? Because when you do get engaged by an organization, people will try to recruit you to their cause. And so you might well be an agent. They want to use you as an agent to achieve their particular agenda. But their agenda doesn't always, in a Venn diagram way, overlap with the interests of the organization or the employees, isn't it? So those are the kind of ethical dilemmas we find ourselves in constantly, don't we?
Absolutely. And here's a nice way a little trick. If you're in an OD consultation, ask yourself, who has the greatest interest expressed in the change process? Who has the greatest access to information? Who has the greatest control and authority, right? Making the final decision. And all of these questions come from, critical ideology. They come from the Frankfurt School, looking at what are the systemic barriers to change. And those barriers, right, they cause all kinds of problems. So, for instance, if you're an OD consultant and you're doing strategic planning times cultural change, that's a popular one, to do both of those at the same time. And you come up with a strategic plan and a culture development plan, and you've vetted it, and the employees have helped to develop it, and your external stakeholders feel good about it, and then you put it down in front of the decision makers who have been involved the whole time, checks and balances, and they don't quite feel comfortable with the way it looks. They want to change some things, right? And so the question as an AI practitioner is there anything they're changing that is fundamental, right? That will undo fundamentally what we've created? Because they do have control. They do have authority, right? Does it fundamentally stray from what our organization has created? And that's where you get into a lot of problems. And OD practitioners rationalize because they know who pays their salary, right? That's where the rubber meets the road. And also why OD is not a straightforward practice. It takes a brave soul. A lot of times we firefight. We're brought in like firefighters, right?
Yes. We're much better in the prevention space, but generally people hire us for firefighting.
Yes. I love that. I love it. It's perfectly said.
Do you think it's possible to do OD in any conditions, or are there certain things that need to be in place to do impactful OD in an organization?
I'm going to give you such a cheap answer. It depends. It depends, right?
You're allowed.
It's such a cheap answer. But this is also why I really am a very big fan of dialogic OD. Very big fan. So if you're using dialogic OD, you see the organization as a sense-making system, right? You're not trying to change the way people act, but you're trying to help them change the way they make sense of things and understand their attitudes from a different perspective. I think Ed Schein at one point said that all organizations, by function of being an organization, are dysfunctional. So you're never really walking into a place that's perfectly conditioned not that's what you were saying, you weren't saying that, but that has all the pieces in place, there's always something that you need to round out. And I think that is best addressed through dialogue. So check out the work. I'm going to name a name that maybe some of your listeners don't know about. The work of Jervis Bush and Bob Marshak. Tremendous work on, so big shout out to them for codifying that for our field.
They've got some great little kind of books that give that a kind of really good introduction to that field if people are interested. So what do you enjoy most about the work you do? You do so many different things, but is there particular parts of it that really kind of spark joy and kind of interest you?
You know, the cheap answer would be when people change and the light bulbs go off. Like, of course, everybody loves that. Everybody loves that. But I think the thing that makes me happy depends on really my own definition of happiness. And it's not that fleeting thing, right? It's more aligns with where is your day most meaningful? So it might not even feel good, but it's highly meaningful to you. It's aligned with your raison d'etre. Right? This is very meaningful to me. So when I look back at all my engagements, the things that were most engaging and meaningful to me were when I, along with my client, teams, emerging leaders, were in the bunker together. And it was not easy. And there were all kinds of forms of resistance, like every type that you'll find in Peter Block's Flawless Consulting, being lobbed at us. Suck it out. A band of brothers and sisters. So when I look back at that, that's what makes me most happy. And it didn't always feel good, but you got up, dusted yourself off, you felt scrappy, and now you have a good war story, right? To tell and help others learn from. So I would say that's what makes me most happy.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarizes all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback. So you mentioned earlier kind of OD, open source OD. You've got 198 tools kind of mapped out. Have you got any particular favourites? Are there ones you come back to time and again?
My goodness. I have ones that are very provocative, especially in spaces that take classic approaches to OD. But you can always, like a Trojan horse, come in to the organizational system looking very classic. But then once you roll that horse in, you let the little soldiers out and they're all innovative. So the innovative thing that I love that has worked in places like US Bank and other very traditional settings is the work of and the tools provided by Otto Scharmer at the Presencing Institute. And you'll not only find those tools on OpenSourceOD, which actually is going to be released this year. So it's very close. It's prototype right now and we're testing it. But you could go right now without waiting to the Presencing Institute website and find some great tools like, let's see, social presencing theater, which sounds like, what the heck is that? Are you familiar with that at all?
Oh.
No. It's
Yeah, see, this is the fun thing. So this is why I like the avant-garde. So what this does is you get a group of people, right? Now imagine you sat them down at a table and you said, all right, what seems to be the problem, right? Their first answer is going to be an answer that, due to, wanting to look good and esteemed amongst your peers, is the answer that everybody's been talking about. But what OD consultants do that is more special than management consultants is they get to the latent needs, the needs behind the problem that are deeply intuitive, and people have a hard time expressing what those needs are. They don't even have the language for it because they don't access it the right way. So what social presencing theater does is, instead of asking people what seems to be the problem or what seems to be your hope, if you're taking an appreciative perspective, is you bring people together and you say, I want you all to assume a pose with your body that embodies the struggle you have right now. And as people know, as people form those things, like it could be like this, it could be like this, it could be like this, there's all these different, right? It could be open. You look around and you begin to intuit what it is, this like more symbolic understanding of what is blocking you as your starting point. And then from that tacit place, you make those feelings and those obstacles and those hopes explicit using words so everybody hears that. And then in social presencing theater, what you do is you all move to a new sculpt, a new way of holding your body that represents the future state that you want to emerge. And that process is called presencing. From the present moment, you're moving into the future that wants to emerge. And then you make that explicit and you draw those connections. So a really great example, I won't name where it was, but it was in a large institution with somebody who was in the C-suite. And we did this. And, everybody's like, what are we doing? This is so weird. But she struck a pose where she was balancing spinning plates on her toes and her fingers. And all of her employees got to see that. That on its own is powerful.
That's a metaphor, isn't it, for people to...
It is a beautiful theatrical metaphor. And then you got to look around the room and you saw what others are doing, right? Another pose she made was kind of like pushing. And she explained this as, I know what we have to do, but I feel like I'm constantly fighting upward and I'm pushing, right? So that's a big answer to your question, but I am really a big fan of the more progressive forms of OD that tap into intuition and this knowledge that sits in sort of qualia, like our ability to know what it's like to be. Something AI can't do, which is also why I love it.
Take that, AI. Our jobs are safe. But I mean, it does something because it goes beyond, because there's limits to our language. Like, how would someone express that? And if you talk to a lot of senior leaders, the palette of colours to paint their description of how they are is very limited, isn't it? Often it's, emotions are suppressed a lot of the time. So at best you'd get 4 or 5 emotions that they can articulate. And that kind of is just, what words could they come up with to express it? So it really creates something that's not possible in other ways, doesn't it? And because it is a shared experience, there's connection in there too. So it's actually incredibly clever, isn't it?
It is, and you'll be surprised. Maybe you'll be surprised, or maybe not, but maybe the listener might be surprised that really big, well-known organizations, like take GE, for instance. A while ago, I had a conversation with their chief learning officer, Rob Cancalosi, and I asked him, how much of your operating budget do you spend on progressive, more innovative forms of learning? And he said something around 30%, which imagine how much money that is for GE's learning group, okay? And I said, tell me an example of something you're doing that's progressive. And this was triggered by something you said, Karen, which is the painting. So they bring executives in, and the objective is to help them become more comfortable with making mistakes and taking risks, which is essentially psychological safety. And the big lesson here is that even when you're painting, things change. So they have executives stand in front of big tanks of water and paint on top of water. And through that experience, unpack and use that as a metaphor for what's going on. And they can develop skills and more of a tolerance for ambiguity and polarity management and these more advanced skills through that experience. And it's fun. It's kind of a fun thing. But there's a lot of new-aged, and you cannot do that with AI. You can't get to that level that OD professionals are really tasked with getting at.
And just to shift gears a bit, what do you find most challenging about them?
That's a good question. I think it's my own assumptions, anxieties, and attachments. I'm not Yoda or Buddha. I'm not walking on water. So I think what's frustrating is the little inner perfectionist in me, that inner voice, and the inner cynic, the voice of the cynic in me, the voice of the pessimist. They all rise in my mind. And so what's frustrating is knowing that they'll always be there and that it's more of a practice of recognizing that they're there. For instance, you're getting defensive about something you just heard someone say, or you have confirmation bias that arises because a leader is challenging your process. So the challenge is really seeing that and letting go of it and coming back to what Ed Schein would call humble inquiry. First principles, asking questions as if it's the first engagement you've ever done. So that's a challenge. It's a real challenge, and it's a practice. And sometimes you take 2 steps forward and then 5 steps back. But that's why I think it's good to have friends like you. When you have friends, you go, okay, you know what? This is natural. This is, we're all in this together, this human thing, this human experience.
But I think it really strengthens the profession when someone who, like yourself, is, you're really well read, for all intents and purposes, a very successful career, like academically, and still finding that internal battle. I think it's really helpful for people at the beginning of the journey to know that as well, because there are so many people we're sort of finding from the podcast and from our own discussions, people feel enormous imposter syndrome at the beginning. Am I doing it? Am I doing OD? And if I'm doing it, how perfectly am I doing it? I'm sure I'm not doing it as well as others. And I think that kind of message just really helps, doesn't it, for those coming through the next generation?
It does. And actually, so when we create our OD Immersives and we work with people like Peter Block and, these big names, I intentionally ask them to provide a case where they made a mistake or they fucked something up or they felt imposter syndrome. And then it's almost like when you watch a war movie. I don't know if you ever watch war movies. My father loves them, so I watched them with him. And at the end of the movie, there's usually a little montage that shows the actual person who is being depicted in the movie. And maybe there's a little interview with them. So at the end of these immersives, you'll see an Ed Schein saying, you know what, actually, to be honest with you, and he did this in the immersive humble consulting. He said, actually, my best consulting was just asking dumb questions. What? The great Ed Schein who wrote all of these books and perspectives. And so when you hear that, you say, well, I can ask dumb questions. I think of dumb questions all the time. So we're trying to dispel that myth of the ninja practitioner.
Somebody said something to me early in my career that about half of what they ask is wrong. And just to get comfortable
Totally.
with that. And it's like that's quite freeing when you've got that. It's like you don't have to have a perfect question or, just expect to be.
I will throw out, I'm going to name drop, one of the people who I've met in my career who knows just the right questions to ask. The ones that blow your mind, and as he would say, make you realize that you're praying to too small a God, is Peter Block, who, started out with flawless consulting, but now is really engaged in the common good. And the questions he asks are at such a deep level of humanity and humility that any chance you have, if you're listening to this, to engage with Designed Learning, which is Peter Block's organization, which does a lot of events online, you just need to connect on LinkedIn, I would go to. In fact, we're having a wisdom exchange. It's an article I wrote on LinkedIn. You could find me on LinkedIn. I'll just put a little plug here at William Brendel. A lot of people look for Bill. But the reason I'm throwing that out there is not so I can up my contact number, but it's because I will throw things out like an invitation to meet with Peter Block and all these greats for emerging practitioners, and to have a wisdom exchange, a two-way wisdom exchange. So we're planning to do that in spring. Again, I think this is the competitive advantage that OD practitioners have, is the ability to release existing wisdom within clients through great questions, great frameworks. So check that out, OD Wisdom Exchange, free, OpenSourceOD will host it. We have a lot of interest.
Brilliant. And all of the links that Bill is sharing with us are going to be in the show notes to go with this episode as well. So whether you listen on audio as well. So absolutely please do, because all the reference that Bill has given you, absolutely brilliant.
Big question, but when you look back at your career, what were some of the biggest lessons that you've learned so far?
I'm going to give you one biggest lesson, and I'm going to refer people, if you're a nerd like I am, refer to the work of Bob Keegan. Read his book, The Evolving Self, which is a little bit of a dense read, and he admits this, but in the first chapter, he talks about how in the Western world, like if I were to hold up, like what do you see? Like when I do this, what do you see in front of you?
Clenched fist.
It's not a trick question.
Yeah,
You see a fist.
Yeah, a fist.
Yeah, it's a fist, right? So as an OD practitioner, we might go into an organization and see a fist. But the Eastern perspective is that this is actually one moment in time of a process of opening and closing your hand. Opening and closing your hand. This is a Bob Keegan reference, so I didn't make this up. So that's really important. Because when you're working with a leader or a team or a group, you have to allow for them to change. Just when you think you've pegged them, their personality, their flaws, if you continue to treat them with that way, you are projecting something onto them as a practitioner, even without words. It could be an eye roll, it could be anything. It could be not asking them for their opinion. People need room to change. People make mistakes. And you as the practitioner need room to change. So that lesson of seeing ourselves as a process versus a single personality and using that fixed mindset. In addition to that, right, seeing ourselves as a process, connecting with our own fallibility right? Our own, I mean, as measures of reality, we're terrible. We're terrible. Have you ever studied eyewitness testimony, how inaccurate eyewitness testimony is? And a lot of OD is eyewitness testimony. It's like what I saw, especially process consultation. So I think that one of the lessons is to always keep yourself honest, check yourself before you wreck yourself. And again, that's a practice. And I haven't figured it out. I'm not going to say that I have, but we're all on that journey.
How are you investing in your own learning and development now? What does that look like for you currently?
This is a very big weakness of mine. I'll be honest with you. And I've had a lot of friends say, you're a producer, but you don't consume. You don't consume, right? And what does that mean? It's not that I don't read, right? Of course, I read all the time. I'm constantly doing research. But really genuinely going to an event or listening to somebody and just putting all of my big thoughts and, favorite things aside. And I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm listening to Peter Block. Or actually, you know what? Let's take another example. Let's say I'm talking to an amazing emerging practitioner. I'm going to name drop Sasha Farley of Sasha Farley Consulting. Let's say I'm listening to her and she's talking about some really amazing things. And by the way, you should connect with her on LinkedIn. An amazing practitioner. I wouldn't even call her emerging anymore. She's fantastic. So if I'm talking to her and I'm listening and I'm learning from her, but my filter is everything she says I want to commodify into OpenSourceOD in some way, I'm not really consuming. I'm really not. I am not letting what she is saying pour over me. So I think that even though I'm doing all kinds of professional development, I have to get better. My greater learning edge is being present, putting all of that aside and letting the person truly communicate and consuming that. So that's the learning edge.
And last question that we always ask in every single podcast, but especially in this one, and we really want you to signpost people to your own resources as well. What advice would you give someone considering a career in organization development? One of the things you talked about in another webinar I was watching about the age of whitewater, the fact that it's such a tumultuous time as well. So what advice would you give for that next generation coming through?
So we just ran an immersive called Permanent Whitewater, which is inspired by the work of Peter Vail, which is another name dropping lots of people. Peter Vail really originally came up with that. Although one of his students used that term, permanent whitewater, he adopted it and it became a big piece for him. The idea that it's no longer what used to be called punctuated equilibrium, where everything's going okay for a while, then there's a big industry change, like a wave, but then you go back to stasis, right? That doesn't exist anymore. Now you have permanent whitewater. And the answer, there's a lot of ways to deal with permanent whitewater, and check out that immersive. We offer that. In fact, we're going to be offering that out of Germany, March 24th. So if you go to OpenSourceOD, it's free and you'll experience that. But the biggest advice I would give is learning mindfulness practice. And here's what I'm going to use a metaphor. Let's say you're in whitewater and you're flailing. And sometimes you see the shoreline and sometimes you see where you're going, but things are changing. Like, for instance, you could be doing strategic planning and then all of a sudden somebody's doing some other strategic plan at the same time that you're working on the main strategic plan. Here comes some more whitewater. So for a new practitioner, the ability, what do? Stop struggling, let go, and come underwater. And surfers know this. If you get pummeled by a big wave, take a deep breath and you go underwater where everything is quiet and you can reestablish center. You can think. And then of course you have to resurface, but you always have that place available to you. And so creating those spaces, whether it's practicing mindfulness in real time, knowing when to disengage when your mind is full and you're like, I can't even think anymore. And then establishing maybe a regular mindfulness practice, which could be way more than meditation. It could be going for a walk, having wine with a friend. So that's my advice, because most people have the skills and the desire and what it takes. But I think that's if you can get that going and make it a habit, that's my advice.
Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolutely fantastic episode. I don't know about you, Danny, but I have the biggest reading list to take away from this. I could see your pen moving and my pen moving if I would capture that. Oh, okay, brilliant. So it has been an all-you-can-eat buffet and everything was absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Bill. Danny, what are you taking away from today's conversation?
So many things. I think this is going to be one of those episodes that people listen back to multipleness and goodness. So I really enjoyed learning about the work of OpenSourceOD and kind of hearing more about the immersives. I think it's such a brilliant concept and so much needed. The social presencing theatre, I'm going to go away and read into that and look at more. And then I think the importance of seeing ourselves as a process, so important.
Yeah, for me, ditto all those things. And I love what you're saying about moral disengagement and the 8 different ways in which it happens, and that organizations, people don't set out to be unethical, but it happens one situation before we find ourselves, and sort of being able to articulate that. And the other thing you talked about is like when you're round the table and you are commissioning the work, who has the greatest interest, and what happens to your commission when they start to salami slice it and starts to become something that, hang on, this isn't what I originally intended, but is that enough? Am I still doing the work as well? So it's been absolutely brilliant. Bill, if people want to follow your work, if they want to sort of keep up to date or connect with you, what is the best way for people to do that?
I'm probably addicted to LinkedIn, to tell you the truth. So if you find me on LinkedIn, William Brendel, I'm constantly posting new free things that you can get involved in. And also check out OpenSourceOD.com. That is where we are putting up so many free resources, and we see it as sort of a movement. So check that out, I would say.
And I've done it, and I'm actually a Renaissance consultant.
All right. That's great.
Very good.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Doing what you do.
So,
you're just soaking it all in. Beautiful.
So for all those that are curious about it, go to Bill's website. It's brilliant. It's very accessible. It's really clean, very easy to use, and it's really eye-opening. And the report that you get is brilliant, and your results are compared against a norm group as well, so even better. So it really is a really great report as well, and loads of resources for you to explore. Bill, you've also got out of your sick bed because you've had flu. So thank you so much for pushing through the pain today. But I think all of our viewers are going to get so much value from it. So thank you.
Thank you. You create this space. It's wonderful. I love listening to your podcast, and you're picking just some of the very best people. I don't know how I wiggled my way, but I love listening to your podcast, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.